Cool. Hold on. Close that. Where are we up to? International trade, welfare, and policy. Nice. Very nice. What?
So today we're going to turn from the analytics and the positive analysis of international trade to the normative analysis of international trade. And we're going to bring our tools of welfare analysis to thinking about how we evaluate international trade. Okay? So we're going to start by talking about the welfare impacts of trade, of international trade, and how that helps us think about the debate over free trade. Now, we showed what we're going to start with is the standard model. And the standard model is going to show us that free trade unambiguously raises social welfare. And the intuition is pretty clear, which is international trade allows for new opportunities where people value goods at more than what they cost to produce. Anytime you have a new opportunity which allows people to value a good at more than it's produced, you raise welfare. It's that simple. So let's actually see it graphically. Let's go to the market for roses. Okay? In figure 19.1, we have the market for roses under autarky. Remember our word for no trade. You've got, and let me be very clear. This figure and the figure I'll show, now doing international trade, we have to be very clear on what kind of figure we're looking at. This is the figure for the U.S. rose market. Okay, we're going to look at different figures, different countries, and different goods. So it's important to keep track. This is the figure for the U.S. rose market. And this is, in figure 19.1, we have what's that market look like before trade.
Okay, I would like it at least at 720 so I can take screenshots. There we go. Or AU. What am I doing? Consumer surplus.
Trade. Well, before trade, you have a domestic demand for roses, a domestic supply for roses. You get a equilibrium price, PA, and an equilibrium quantity, QA, and you end up with a consumer and producer surplus of the type we derived a few lectures ago in a standard market. Now, let's imagine we open up to international trade, and let's imagine that comparative advantage is such that the U.S. imports roses. Remember, last time we were talking about a two-good model, like computers and roses. Now we're just focusing on the market for roses. But let's say that two-good model delivered the outcome that the U.S. would import roses, as it implied last time. What would that do? Well, imports do not affect domestic demand and supply. Domestic demand has not changed. People still want roses. Domestic supply has not changed. The marginal cost of producing a rose has not changed just because we can now import them from Colombia. What's changed is the equilibrium price, which is now essentially we have lowered the price by incorporating a new source of outside supply. Okay? Another way you could do this, it's not, you could ask, well, where's this new line come from? Imagine, you could, if you want, imagine a new line which is below the domestic supply line, which is the
new line, which is below. How do I easily get this to here? Oh, it's just like that. Okay. New line that is below the domestic supply line. Oops. Darn it. Darn it. What is it to move? H? Yeah. And then 7 to draw. So this is in autarky. Okay. Okay. Domestic. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Autarky. Yep.
Domestic plus international supply. That would be a line parallel to the red line. And that would intersect domestic demand at the price PW.
All right. PW is in world, I guess. So like, oops. So like this. Because domestic supply, no, hold on. Domestic supply. It's below, parallel below. Because, right, because you're willing to supply the same amount at a lower price. Right, so like, oops, oh my god, let's just do this. Why is this? Oh my god. Can you please? Okay. Okay, I'm just going to draw it. So, okay, but imagine that's perfectly straight. So, yeah, we will basically, yeah, so you're willing to, so here we have, say, Q, why is this so thick? QW, PW? P world, like quantity produced by the world, or like once free trade has opened up, international trade has opened up, and because there's a greater supply, well, there's greater supply, and they're willing to sell at a lower price because it's more efficient. Assuming that your nation has a comparative disadvantage of producing it. Oh, whoops. I think that's right.
So think of a new supply curve below that. But that's not really true, so we don't draw it. But that's sort of a way to think about how we get to this new price. That by allowing in cheap roses, you've lowered the price, and basically people can have more roses. So now at that new price, people want C sub T roses.
Sub T. Let me paste that in there. And let's have a look at this. Can I just move that down? Whoops, move that down. Okay. Price of roses per box. Well, and then domestic demand. Domestic supply. And okay, so this is the autarky price. So this is if there's no trade, and this is if there's international trade. The price if there's international trade. So the price is lowered. This is the world price. And QT domestic quantity supplied with trade. Domestic quantity supplied with trade. Well, this is domestic supply. Oh. Oh, because right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay. So it's just showing what happened to the domestic supply. Yeah, US domestic market for roses. Right. So the price is lower on the domestic supply, which means domestic demand. World price. Right, and so that's why there's this gap. So this gap here is filled in by world supply. Right? And that's why it's drawn here. Okay. So quantity A is the gap. How much is produced? Okay, to meet the new domestic demand, which is at the lower price. Okay. CT, domestic quantity demanded with trade. Yeah, at the lower price. Okay. Quantity trade. Oh, right. And this is, again, this is a lower, this is how much domestically is being produced, and that's obviously lower because of the comparative disadvantage. All right. Okay.
At that new lower international trade price, people want C sub T roses.
Yeah.
Okay?
T. What? P sub T?
C sub T roses.
Oh, C sub T. Oh, C subscript T, right. People want this number of roses. Yeah.
New lower international trade price. People want C sub T roses.
Right.
Okay?
Hold on. Effects are effects upon domestic market. Well, one, domestic firms will produce less because the price is lower and they can't. Price is lower. And they can't compete with the global supply. Well, they can't basically. Price is lower. And that's QT. Oops. And CT domestic demand is much higher because the price is lower. Therefore, QA is the gap, is the supply gap filled by trade. Okay. Cool.
And now we're going to assume that world supply, here's an important assumption. Okay, this is a very important assumption often made in trade models. World supply is perfectly elastic with respect to domestic markets. Let me restate that. We're assuming that world supply is...
perfectly elastic, as in inelastic is you pay like if you're if the demand is inelastic, then you're willing to take whatever price. And so if the supply is inelastic, so if the demand is elastic, if the demand's inelastic, you're willing to take whatever price because you have to have it. But if it's elastic, then you then you're not affected by the price. Well then any change in the price means so like if there's like a teeny bit of a drop in the price, you're not going to buy it anymore, right? So it's something that it's like a luxury, super luxury good, or something that's perfectly substitutable with something else, like Macca's or Hungry Jack's burgers. And so if the supply is elastic, well, if the supply is inelastic, this is like how much. Right, so if the supply is inelastic, that means that like they can't change how much they're producing easily. Like goods where it takes a while to ramp up to that production or to lower it. Like oil wells. If because I know some oil wells, I don't know if it might be the majority, are like difficult to turn off and difficult to restart. I know that there are exceptions. Is that would be right? Let me review elasticity of demand. But I only looked at elasticity of demand. Oh, not the market being perfectly elastic. Market supply is a more elastic version of firm supply. Supply curve. This is all elasticity. I'm pretty sure. Okay, I don't have anything on the elasticity of supply, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. Elasticity of supply economics. Price elasticity of supply. Responsiveness to the quantity supplied of a good, yeah. Or change in service to a change in its price. Okay. Yeah. So if it was perfectly elastic, then basically the quantity supplied can instantly change depending on the price. So like basically we can move if it was perfectly elastic, if the domestic supply here was perfectly elastic, then basically domestic firms could move anywhere along here instantly. Right? Okay. For some reason, like perfect elasticity never sits well in my brain, but like inelasticity is of demand and is clear. But so an elasticity of demand is, yeah, right. I guess a better way of well thinking of it is your how much you consume, how much, well, the demand, the demand is willing to change, is able to change instantaneously to any point if there's a slight shift in price. If the demand is perfectly elastic. Okay, good. So world supply is perfectly elastic with respect to domestic markets. Okay, so this is key assumption for international trade. Okay.
Perfectly elastic with respect to domestic markets. That is,
Yeah.
this is what we typically call a small open economy model, small country open economy model.
Small.
We're assuming the U.S. is so small that demand from the U.S. can't actually affect the underlying supply of roses. Now, that's not true for many markets. The U.S. is that big. But just think about a case where the U.S. is a small enough share of the world market that basically it's basically like facing a market with a perfectly competitive, a perfectly elastic supply curve.
Yeah. Okay.
So basically, the key point is we're going to assume the production of roses in the U.S. doesn't impact world supply.
Okay.
And that's probably true in roses.
Oh, and the production. And, okay, so production of roses doesn't impact world supply. Right. Okay.
Right? Because we're a small producer of roses. So how many roses the U.S. produced didn't really matter for world supply. It's certainly not true in computers. And it's sort of unclear about oil. Okay? Most oil comes from outside the world, but we do produce some oil here in the U.S. But for roses, it's a pretty fair assumption. It's pretty fair to assume that the domestic supply of roses is trivial relative to the world supply of roses.
Oh, let me start making my little notes here. Autarky. Okay. Copy that down.
So we get this flat supply curve. So what do we get? Well, the U.S. consumers now want, that should be a Q, by the way.
The C sub T should be a Q.
That should be a Q sub T.
And or maybe like T1, T2, Q sub T1, Q sub T2.
So the U.S. consumers now want change that from C sub T to Q sub T. The U.S. consumers now want Q sub T roses, okay? But at that new low price, domestic producers don't want to supply Q sub T. Remember, domestic producers have to respect their supply curve. They only want to produce where.
Yeah. Domestic demand is much higher because price is lower, and the firms can't produce, efficiently enough to meet the new demand. To produce the same amount at the lower price. Remember, Q equals a marginal benefit, marginal cost. Q produced Remember Q. Okay.
Price equals marginal cost. So they're going to produce Q sub T. Oh, I'm sorry. That's what I got backwards. Yes, I'm sorry. That is C sub T. That's what I missed. Scratch what I.
Well, why? What does C stand for? Because in both this one and this one, both QT and CT, it's post-trade, and I assume T means trade. But I guess it's like, should be like, yeah, QT1 or QT D, QT World, or, yeah, I don't know.
I said earlier, C sub T is domestic quantity demanded. Q sub T is domestic quantity produced.
Yeah.
That's what I got wrong. So leave it C sub T. I was wrong about that. Q sub T is domestic quantity supplied. C sub T is domestic quantity demanded. Okay? Consumers at this new low price want C sub T. Producers want to produce Q sub T. What's the difference? The difference is the roses that come from other countries, which we call imports.
Yeah.
So the dynamics are, we open the market to Colombia. Because of that, the price of roses falls. Yeah. At that lower price, consumers want C sub T roses. Producers only want to produce Q sub T roses. What's the difference? The ones we import from Colombia. Okay? Questions about that? Got to understand that basic graph, because now we're going to use that to look at welfare. Now let's go to figure 19.3 and think about what are the welfare impacts of this trade.
The impact of imports on consumer and producer surplus. Can I please? There we go. And paste. Cool. Okay, so it seems like what I should be doing is just leave a window open to paste images in. Then I can just easily copy paste it in, have somewhere to draw, paste it in here for note taking. But this is domestically. Domestic. US. Well, and right, we've got now this is the new quantity produced domestically. This is the gap. This is the demand. Okay. And when we were at point A with autarky, we had the consumer surplus of W and the producer surplus of X. Right, so, consumer, I know the answer is here, but I'm trying not to look at it so I can think through it myself. Consumer, it was W. Can I close this? Producer is X, right? In autarky. And now at point C, or at here, I wouldn't call this point C, or just B actually, B. At point B, this is all the consumer surplus. But now so trade, we have C, P, right? Now we have W, X, and where X is now this as well. Really, there should have been another one here, maybe. Yeah, there should have been another one here. Another letter here, but X, let me zoom out a little bit. And Z. And producer surplus is just Y. Okay. So let's see what, if I'm understanding it correctly. I think that's right, because this is all the producers are making, and the consumers get all of this. Yeah. Seems right. And so, okay, so what does it say? Change in gain. Changes in gain. Consumer surplus. Z plus X plus Z. Okay, so changes in gain. So, yeah, we've already got W. X plus Z, yep. Producer surplus loses X, yep. Oh, right, because, right, I was missing 7, because producer surplus has Y over here as well, because it has, has Y, because it does have this initially, right? It does initially have this. Okay, so actually, producer surplus, yeah, loses X. I mean, there should be another letter here. There should be a smaller one. W, X, Y, V, I guess. Or Y. Oh, no. V. V could be here. Because producer surplus isn't losing X. It isn't losing this. It's losing this, right? Okay, minus, and so the change in total surplus is, oh, yeah, is Z. So Z is referring to this whole triangle. But it should be split. I don't know. I don't understand why it's not split into two smaller triangles. Anyway, whatever. Okay, cool. Okay, we've got it.
Well, here what we have is, initially we start with domestic supply and domestic demand. Before trade, we have QA roses being sold in the U.S. at a price PA.
Yeah.
So the pre-trade consumer surplus, before trade, the consumer surplus, so under autarky, consumer surplus is W, and producer surplus is X plus Y. Okay? That's the producer-consumer surplus before there's trade. Now we open up to trade. What happens under trade is now consumers get to consume C sub T. So consumer surplus is now W plus X, W plus X plus Z. Consumer surplus is W plus X plus Z. Producer surplus has fallen all the way to Y. Okay? So basically what we've done is, by expanding to trade, we've done two things. We've transferred X from producers to consumers, but we've added Z.
Yeah.
So welfare has gone up. It's the opposite of the deadweight loss case. The deadweight loss case, with a minimum wage or other regulation restrictions, we would transfer, but we'd have an efficiency loss in that transfer. Here's a transfer with an efficiency gain. This is the opposite of those cases. Remember? Before, whenever you saw transfers before, they came along with deadweight losses. Here's a transfer that comes along with a deadweight with a gain. Okay? We've now transferred X to consumers, but also given them Z. So consumers win by a lot, and producers lose. Okay? And that's the welfare analysis of international trade, of imports. Questions about that? Consumers win, producers lose. Consumers win because they get a ton of cheap roses. Producers lose because they lose that production to Colombia. Now, of course, international trade consists of both imports and exports. Let's look at exports. So now let's turn to the market for computers. Okay, now
Exports. Exports. And they'll put here imports. Well, why can't I just... what's the world price in exports? Okay, whatever. Okay. So we have domestic supply, domestic demand, price autarky, so price increased. We've got that arrow there. Autarky price. Right, and so this gap is the exports, right. So basically, it's the inverse. Now, consumers are have less surplus domestically, but producers have more surplus because now producers are going to have this surplus, and consumers are going to have this surplus. Okay.
Now we have in 19.4 computers. Now here we're gonna continue to assume world supply is perfectly elastic. That's probably wrong. The U.S. is big enough to affect the market for computers, but let's just assume the U.S. is small for a second. Makes life much easier. So what happens is we're initially in autarky at point Q sub A P sub.
Well, this title isn't quite right. It should be impact of international trade on domestic US domestic market. Well, the impact of exports. Yeah. And it's basically reduces Q sub T is increased domestic supply due to higher price. C sub T decreased domestic demand due to higher price, and then QA. Hold on, what's the hotkey to just jump to the end? Oh, that's so far away. I don't want to hit that. I could. Well, we'll try that. Export the exports. Yeah.
Bay. Now the U.S. says we're going to send a bunch of the computers we're making in the U.S. and send them to Colombia. What does that do? That means that there's fewer computers in the U.S., so the price goes up. Okay? There's less supply in the U.S. The supply curve hasn't changed. Underlying marginal costs haven't changed. It's just that they're taking some of those computers that they used to produce for the U.S. and produce for Colombia. As a result, you move up the supply curve to the new higher price PW. That's the new higher price. Once you open up to trade, that's good for the computer producers. They can now sell to more people. So now at that higher price, okay, producers want to produce Q sub T, but consumers only want C sub T. We flipped it. Consumers now want to produce Q sub T. The price is up. They want to produce a lot of computers. Consumers are like, look, computers are more expensive. I don't want the computers. So you end up with Q sub T being produced, C sub T being domestically demanded, and the difference is exports. So it's the flip case. Okay, for imports, we open up to Colombia, they lower the price of roses, you end up with more consumers wanting more roses than the producers are willing to produce, you get imports. With exports, we open the market to Colombia, producers in the US produce fewer computers, the price goes up, so you have more computers being produced than people want. So they produce fewer computers. They raise the price because they can sell at a higher price in the world market. You have more computers being produced than people want, and you end up with exports.
So really, the key points are basically trade increases imports increase, assuming specialization due to comparative. Yeah, I mean, like, assuming, like, whoops, specialization due comparative advantage. Perfectly elastic. Well, that's a previous assumption, which I should remember that carries through. And well, one, imports result in a net gain in domestic welfare, and a result in a loss for producer surplus, but net gain, domestic welfare, and exports result in a loss lower producer surplus, in lower consumer surplus, because it's been shifted to producer surplus. Yeah. there's a nice. I'm trying to write this in a very tight, summarized way. Imports and exports. Shift. Transfer. Surplus from all imports from producer to consumer and consumer to producer, respectively, and result in a net efficiency, a net welfare gain. And add welfare on net. Yeah. Okay. And basically, if I don't understand that, or if I forget that, what that actually means, then I just reread back through this. But that's, yeah. This is like the memory trigger for me. That'll trigger all this. Cool.
Now, what's the welfare analysis of exports? This is quite interesting. Let's go to figure 19.5.
For a domestic market. Impact of export to consumer. Well, yeah, this is what we already.
Okay. Under autarky, what is the consumer surplus? Well, under autarky, the consumer surplus is W plus X.
Yeah.
And what is the producer surplus?
Y.
It's Y.
But then it's shifting.
Now what happens under trade? Well, under trade, you move from PA to PW. So consumer surplus shrinks. It's only W. Consumers aren't getting as much surplus because they're paying more for computers. But what's producer surplus now? Well, it's X plus Y plus Z. So we have the flip case. Now we've transferred surplus from consumers to producers. And producers have also gotten Z. So it's a transfer with a gain. You've got consumers losing by X, producers winning by X plus Z. Total social welfare goes up by the area Z. So this is kind of bizarre if you think about it. Imports increase social welfare, and exports increase social welfare. It's kind of crazy, but it's true. Basically, both are true because you are creating gains from trade by opening up to a new market. So in either case, you get welfare increases from trade. This is the fundamental analytics of international trade that economists grow up with. Okay? It's whispered to us at bedtime. Okay, free trade is good. Why is free trade good? Free trade is good because it opens up new possibilities for welfare improving trades. It opens up new possibilities for people who value a good to get it at above what it costs to produce it. Full stop. Okay? Now, you might say, well, that is great. We know everybody listens to economists, of course, so that seems the end of the problem. But in fact, it's not. In fact, if you follow the news at all, you'll know that this is not necessarily a consensus view, that there's a lot of debate in the policy world and in the economics world about trade policy. There's a lot of debate about trade policy. Let's start with the simplest case. Imports are a job killer. Imports are a job killer. Why are imports a job killer? Well, because since we are growing more roses in Colombia and fewer here, producer surplus is down, fewer roses are grown in the US, so fewer rose workers are needed, so they get fired. There were presumably thousands of people employed in producing roses in the US who now no longer have a job.
Yeah.
Because we get them from Colombia. So as a result, people say we should limit imports because they're killing American jobs. They always use the word kill. It's very violent. They're not, taking away. They're killing American jobs. Okay? So that's the area that we should have some limitation trade policy. Okay? So basically, for example, we could impose a tariff. I mentioned this earlier in the course. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. So we could say that any roses that come from Colombia, we will tax them. So a tariff is a specific tax on imports. Well, as I'll show you in a minute, but I think your intuition could tell you already, this turns out to be a bad idea because while it does help producers, it hurts consumers more. And to see that,
I mean, aren't you just like by applying a tariff, aren't you just like moving back down the scale? Like, aren't you just say directly reducing the impact of the imports? So like instead of instead of going all the way up here, you're just going like a little bit up, right? And so we have like a little tariff pushing this way and have the new point. Is it? But so, but are there like are there like other effects other than moving back down to say here? I mean, the government gets the money from the tariff. That would be like a, I don't know, would you call that like a secondary effect or something? But like in terms of just the market. Let's keep listening.
let's go to figure 19.6.
Tariff. Price with tariff. Price. Right, so domestic supply and demand. So price domestically would be here. So it's a lower price. Well, I mean, I guess it would depend on the size of the tariff, but like in this case, it's a lower price than domestically. It results in a lower price than domestically. Yeah, so we're just like moving back a little bit towards the autarky, right?
Now we're back to the market for roses. The red and blue lines are autarky. Under world trade, we went down to PW, and we imported the difference between Q1 and C1. Okay, slightly different magnitudes here. So once again, under world trade, we went from the initial equilibrium down to PW. Producers only produced Q1, so a lot of jobs got lost. Consumers wanted C1, so you had a lot of imports. Now we impose a tariff. Well, what does the tariff do? It raises the price of Colombia-specific roses. In particular, if the tariff was the exact difference between PT,
it would just
between the initial price,
no
it's not marked here, but PA, where the red and blue lines intersect.
Trade, right?
If the tariff was the actual difference between PA, the autarky price, and the world price, then you'd shut down imports. There'd be no reason to import them because you get them for the same price.
Yeah, okay. um, between the price between P A price in autarky and P world price with free trade, then there would be no difference. Yeah. Or there'd be no imports. Yeah.
In the US. But that's an uninteresting case. Let's imagine a tariff, but it's not quite as big as the difference between the price, the world price, and the US price. So the tariff now of an amount that raises the price from PW to PT. We put in a tariff, but it's not enough to wipe out Colombia's advantage. It just reduces Colombia's advantage. And why is that a shift up of the line? Because essentially what we've done is we've made the imported roses more expensive. So that raises the price those imported roses face. So we move now to PT, okay? And we move to new equilibrium where consumers consume fewer roses, C2. Producers in the US, remember it's a US diagram, producers in the US produce more roses, Q2, and we end up with a smaller level of imports. After tariff, the imports have shrunk from C1 minus Q1 to C2 minus Q2. Questions about the analytics? I know I'm going fast here. This is sort of a new world.
Hold on, I need to make a note. I want to... Okay, let me close that.
So please stop me if there's questions about this. Okay. Now, let's then take that and look at the welfare analysis of tariffs. Well, now we're going to compare a world with free trade to a world with a tariff. With free trade, we are at Q1 and C1. With the tariff, we've dropped to Q2 and C2. What has happened? Well, by moving from Q...
C. Well, C is the net change, or the residual benefit from the imports, right?
Q1 to Q2, okay, we have increased producer surplus
right, government
by A.
revenue. Oh, I was thinking of something else. Move that. So okay, so quantity produced. But if we're like comparing now government revenue, if we're looking at government revenue now, how do we then think about the change in government revenue? Well, I guess maybe it's outside the scope, but like, But like, you know, there's going to be a loss in government revenue from taxing businesses, maybe. I think that's outside the scope. Anyway, let's just think about this. So just for the tariff. Okay. So price world domestic demand, and this is all right. This is imports. Okay, so yeah, and so consumer surplus used to be here. Producer surplus used to be here. Now that we have the tariff, domestic demand, consumer surplus is here. Producer surplus is here. Hold on. Yeah, here. Including that little triangle there. And producer surplus is here. And B, C, why is just C the government revenue and not... But the government revenue... Oh, right, because... Right, so for the goods still coming in, they're paying a tariff. Someone's paying a tariff. And this represents... Well, the difference between Q2 and C2 is how many imports there still are occurring, and therefore a tariff. And so why is it price world, price tariff? Right. It's that square because that's the amount of the applied tariff. Okay. And B. What is B? Changes in surplus loss. B. Okay, I didn't really understand that. But B. Right. Well, B and D used to be part of consumer surplus, but it's not part of. It's nothing now. It's not part of the tariff. Okay, so they're just gone. B and D are gone. Right. B and D are gone. And so in this example, it's always bad because it's always a net reduction in welfare, because even if we're including the government revenue doesn't make up for the lost surplus of B&D. But we might think it's good if we value the government having C over the consumers having BCD, so basically we're saying, you know, is it worth sacrificing consumer surplus B and D for government revenue C and producer surplus A? That's really the question. Okay. Okay. So, okay. Yeah. So C equals, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Make sure you see that. Producer surplus up by A. Why is producer surplus up by A? Because the price is up from PW to PT and they're selling more roses. Producer surplus is up by A.
Okay.
Consumer surplus, however, has fallen by B, C, so consumer surplus has fallen by all of A, B, C, and D. Consumer surplus is down by the entire trapezoid A, B, C, D. That's all come out of consumer surplus. That's all sales that were under the demand curve above the price that are now gone. Okay, so can people see that whole trapezoid? I've added 4 letters, but it's really just one trapezoid. That whole trapezoid's gone. Okay, because that's the area under the demand curve above the price that's now no longer there. So consumers have transferred A to producers, but they've lost A plus B plus C plus D. Now here's the extra wrinkle. C is different than B and D. C is not deadweight loss. Normally you say, well, if producers didn't gain it and consumers lost it, it's deadweight loss. But what have we forgotten here? What's the other party in play here? Why is this not a deadweight loss, but rather a transfer? And who's it a transfer to? Yeah.
The government.
Yeah, it's a transfer to the government because the tariffs raise money. Give her a high five there. She got it. Okay? Because the government raised money.
I like that. I want to save moments like that. Hold on. There's so many of these. I really like the encouragement. 1956. We'll do 19.
Rather a transfer. And who's it a transfer to? Yeah.
The government.
Yeah, it's a transfer to the government because the tariffs raise money. Give her a high five there. She got it. Okay? Because the government raised money. All right? The government raises money by this tariff, and that's another transfer. So essentially, and the amount of money the government raises is what? Well, the amount of remaining imports, C2 minus Q2, times the size of the tariff, which is the...
Do I already have a thing on... We've already covered tariffs a little bit. Tax on important goods. Yeah. Tax on imported goods. I should put that here.
rectangle C. So what's happened here is consumers have lost A, B, C, D. Producers have gained A. The government has
Oh, right. B and D. Well, yeah, I was thinking that this is like surplus that has been lost completely to the ether. And not transferred.
gained C. And B plus D are welfare, are deadweight loss. So the tariff has overall lowered welfare. We are worse off. In order to transfer C to the government and A to producers, we've given up as well B plus D.
Yeah.
So we're worse off. Society's worse off from restricting that. Okay? So the fundamental argument for free trade is, once again, a barrier to free trade lowers welfare. This is just a corollary of the previous proof, which showed the free trade maximized welfare. Well, here we're showing how a barrier to free trade, this is operationalizing, how does a barrier to free trade lower welfare? Okay? Questions about that? Now, that's why economists like free trade, but it's not the only reason economists like free trade. There's fundamentally three arguments for free trade. The first argument of free trade is the basic welfare analysis. Welfare maximization. The second analysis for free trade
C gained in efficiency. Yeah.
is that when you impose that tariff, you're not done. Because what's going to happen then? What's Colombia going to do?
Respond.
What's Colombia going to do? Yeah. On U.S.'s what? Computers. Remember, our welfare was maximized for exports by opening up the trade to exports. What Colombia's going to say, well, screw you, got a tariff on my roses, I'm going to have a tariff on your computers. Well, I don't do the example here. We should be able to go. Go back and show yourself how a Colombian tax tariff on our exports, okay, is going to raise the price in Colombia. Imagine a Colombian domestic market. Just like our tariff. So imagine instead of the market for roses in the US, do the market for computers in Colombia. What you'll see is a tariff on US computers will lower the number of computers sold in Colombia. Well, that hurts our producers. So by imposing this tariff and starting a potential trade war, which isn't nearly as cool as it sounds, okay, by starting a trade war, what we've done is essentially hurt not only our consumers, we've also hurt our producers. Remember, the whole idea was to help our producers. But by helping the rose producers, we've now hurt the computer producers. So it's not even clear we raise producers. Surplus at all. We clearly lower consumer surplus, not clearly we raise producer surplus at all. Okay? So first of all, the welfare analysis is even stronger than you think. Because you're missing the fact that if there's a trade war, our exporters get hurt too.
Right. So this is, I guess you could say, yeah, this is part of welfare.
Second of all,
maximization.
What have we forgotten in our typical American fashion? That there's other people out there in the world that matter too. Okay? And just as free trade makes us better, it also makes other countries better. So you could redo this whole analysis I've done. You guys have plenty of free time. Do it for fun sometime. Read this whole analysis I've done from Colombia's perspective and show how opening up to trade to the U.S. made Colombia better off. It increased consumer surplus more than producer surplus for computers. Okay? And, I'm sorry, for reduced consumer, for computers. And basically, and for roses, society also is made better off. You can do the same flip.
How do I do? I think I remember. Microeconomics, and then what was it again? That one? Yes. Yes. And that will take me to there. Great. Okay. How do I make an alias? I think it's like... There we go.
The analysis.
Nice.
And show that free trade helped Colombia too. So even if you don't buy the welfare maximization argument, even if you don't buy the trade war argument, if you care at all about people around the world, then that's another argument for free trade. You're not only helping us, you're helping everyone else. Okay? I have never seen that as vividly as when I went to Vietnam. I talked about the Vietnam rice example a few lectures ago. You know, Vietnam was in a really horrific war with the US, and it's an incredibly moving place to go for that reason, especially people of my generation lived through that war. But they love Americans. And that's why they said, because we were a desperately poor, starving country until you opened to free trade in 1994. Bill Clinton's their hero. When you opened to free trade in 1994 and allowed us to export our rice to America, it massively increased our wealth levels. And I showed you one result of that. There was less child labor in Vietnam. But generally, their standard of living just went way up. And it really brought home to me this argument, okay, which is that we can help other countries by allowing free trade too, and we shouldn't forget that. Okay? Now, this has, if you think about it, this kind of smacks of the flavor of the Nash model with non-cooperative and cooperative equilibria. Free trade is a cooperative equilibria where we're all better off by cooperating. We're not explicitly forming a cartel. We're cooperating to allow free trade by lowering barriers to trade. We're making everyone better off. Whereas the non-cooperative equilibria is, wow, I don't want my guys to lose jobs, so I'm going to impose a tariff, so you impose a tariff, and we both end up worse off. So this very much feels like cooperative versus non-cooperative equilibrium in the Nash model. And in fact, that's been realized enough over time that there's been more and more movement towards free trade. So if you look at the decades from really World War II all the way up to about 2017 was a steady movement towards free trade around the world. There were arrangements, and the way that was done was by a number of rules that were set up to impose free trade. Essentially, the companies got together and formed a cartel. And they said, look, we're going to make sure we trade freely with each other by setting up rules that don't allow any one country to impose tariffs and start a trade war. So it's like a unilateral disarmament among countries. There were agreements. There was the World Trade Organization was set up, which is trying to promote free trade by setting rules that
WTO. Trade Environment Week. I wonder if they. I wonder what papers and research they put out. Documents online. Economic. Research by country. I'd like to look at Australia. Tariff profiles. Data on the bound or maximum tariff rates over 170 economies and the rates they apply in practice. Tariff profiles. What year is this? What year is this? This looks like a chapter from something. House of Representative Committees. Okay. But it might be interesting. Tariff data. World Trade Report. Global Trade Outlook. Like it'll be interesting to see if there's like well, basically like one of the things I want eventually once I finish this lecture series and maybe macroecon is to look at some of the one of the proposed gas export taxes or import. I don't know. I think it must be export taxes for Australia, and I wonder if these guys could be one source of research on it, but it might be too granular of for what they're focusing on. Trade topic. Okay, hold on. Technical. Is this all? Are these all? Let's look at the top one. It's all like educational focus. Agriculture Gateway. Trade topics. This website isn't loading properly. Market for goods. Customs duties on merchandise imports are called tariffs. Tariffs give a price advantage to locally produced goods over similar goods which are imported. They raise revenues for governments. One result of the Uruguay round was countries' commitments to cut tariffs and bind their customs duty rates to levels which are difficult to raise. Well, you bind it to levels, basically, and so it makes it difficult to raise the rates, I guess. Current negotiations on our agenda. Continue efforts in the direction. Information on tariff. I'm just curious to see how, like, fundamental of a what the target audience is. If the target audience is people like me, that will be fantastic, and I think it might be noobs rather than economists. Developed countries' tariff cuts were, for the most part, phased in over 5 years from 1st of January 1995. The result is 40% cut in their tariffs on industrial products from an average of, The value of imported industrial products that receive duty-free treatment in developed countries will jump from 20% to 44%. The value of imported... Okay, and so this is the cost to the... So this is showing that the lost consumer surplus, right? If value is literally, basically like... I think that's I think that's a lost consumer surplus gain producer surplus. Hold on, no, the value of hold on, no, that would be if a tariff was applied. The value of imported industrial products that receive duty-free treatment. Oh no, I was I was misreading it. The amount. So, say if we have say if all of the industrial products that we have are worth $100, and initially $20 of value of that didn't have. For $20, there was no tariff applied of value of that $100, and now it's increased from $20 to $44. Okay, so that's the increase the decrease in tariff, basically. Yeah, I was gonna say increase in tariff cut, but yeah, we'll try to avoid too many negatives. Cool. Okay, dude, this is a sick. This is a sick page. Let me just save this. This is freaking sick. Sick.
rules that have trade be free around countries. There was, very importantly in the US, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was once again signed in the Clinton administration, okay, which established virtually tariff-free trade between Canada, the US, and Mexico. And a number of other free trade agreements were negotiated around the world. And once again, let me be very clear. What's stunning from my perspective is that it was Democrats as well as Republicans who were into this. When I grew up, Democrats were against free trade, Republicans were for it. That changed. Bill Clinton really led the charge. So really we had a world where there was sort of a universal consensus for free trade, okay? Now, I'm not saying, I shouldn't say universal. There was a lot of movement. Plenty of people were upset about it for various reasons. I remember my sister graduated University of Chicago in 1999, and Bill Clinton was the presidential speaker, and a bunch of people wouldn't shake his hand because they didn't like the free trade deal he signed. I thought that was pretty intense. So basically, it wasn't a universal agreement, but certainly there was a large movement in that direction for many, many decades. And that completely reversed. And it reversed, it was starting to reverse pre-COVID, and it's really reversed post-COVID, okay? And basically, we are now moving away from that. President Trump put in a lot of anti-trade provisions, in particular a large tariff on Chinese goods. And to be honest, President Biden has kept a lot of it. I mean, he got rid of some of it, but he's kept more than he's gotten rid of in terms of international trade restrictions. So it's sort of that we've gone from a consensus very rapidly from a consensus for international trade to one against, and COVID made it much, much worse. Why did COVID make it much, much worse? Because COVID exposed the problem with international trade, which is it creates interdependencies in production chains. You often heard the term supply chain as a problem, what was going wrong during COVID.
Well, it's just, I mean, because interdependency, there's pros and cons to that, right? So like, interdependency would be, like it's not clear against, because, I mean, like, you know, it motivates you to work with your to work with the other countries to make sure everyone is resilient.
Because of free trade, we created production processes that were integrated around the world. And when trade shut down during COVID, that's those supply processes sort of collapsed. The most vivid example is semiconductors. Semiconductors are the core of every modern thing we own, from our cars to our phones to now in toilets and everything, okay? And basically, as I think I mentioned before, 75% of all semiconductors are produced in Taiwan, okay? And we couldn't get them all of a sudden. In the US, and we saw prices for cars go through the roof. I don't know if you know, but during COVID, price of a car went up 2 or 3 times. It was largely just because of the shortage in semiconductors, okay? So now there is basically a lot of people arguing against free trade. And what are their basic arguments, okay? So why do people oppose free trade? Well, one argument is the new one I mentioned, which is sort of supply chain dependencies.
Yeah, but
Supply chain dependencies / national security. So the argument is, look, if 75% of semiconductors are produced within 100 miles of China, and we feel that we might go to war with China, we're pretty screwed if we don't have a domestic semiconductor industry. Well, how do you make a domestic semiconductor industry? Well, you can do 2 things. One is you can tax Taiwanese semiconductors, but we don't do that because Taiwan is an ally of ours. The other thing you could do is you could subsidize the American semiconductor industry. Think about the American semiconductor industry. They are doing the same analysis we've done, marginal cost, marginal benefit. They're saying, look, the truth is, at the price point for semiconductors today, we can't produce them cheaply enough, so we're just going to let them come from Taiwan. What if you said to them, you know what? We'll give you a bunch of money if you produce semiconductors. They might say, well, if you give us enough, then we can produce them even if we can't compete effectively with Taiwan. And that's what we did. We said we passed the CHIPS Plus Science Act, which puts $52 billion aside for US domestic semiconductor manufacturing to try to build that. And a lot of the argument was we don't want to spend the supply chains that China may control, and part of the reason is national security. So that's one reason people are opposing free trade. Okay? The second argument is the one where economists have probably fallen down the most, which is, we might call this argument non-compensation of the losers. The basic argument for free trade that I grew up with runs as follows. If you allow imports, consumers will gain more than producers will lose. As long as we take some of that extra and transfer it back to producers, everybody wins. Let's go up to here. Imagine that we move, this is with trade. We move to trade. Remember, trade took consumer surplus from W to W plus X plus Z.
Right, right.
Producer surplus from X plus Y to Y.
Yeah.
What if we took the X from consumers and moved it over here? Well, then what happens? Consumers are better off. They still have W plus Z. Producers are no worse off. They're the same as they were before. So we can make everybody better off. We can create no losers from free trade by simply taking some of the extra benefits that are created and giving them to the losers. It's theoretically brilliant. It's a great way to argue why free trade's good. Because as long as the winners win by more than the losers lose, you can take some of the winners' winnings and give it to the losers, keep them whole, and everybody's better off, or at least no worse off. Okay? The problem is,
it's very difficult
we
in
haven't done
practice, I imagine.
in theory it works. In practice, we don't do it. And this is made no more evident than by the fascinating research of my colleague David Autor. David Autor, who's an outstanding labor economist, has looked at what happened around the US due to rising imports from China. And basically, it's a very clever study where he looks at industries. Basically, Chinese imports became much cheaper after we passed the free trade agreement. It looks at industries that were more and less susceptible to Chinese imports. And
Who was the
outstanding labor
person's name?
economist has looked at what David Autor, who's an outstanding
Autor.
labor economist,
David Autor? Otter? Autor. I got it pretty close.
has looked at what happened around the US due to rising imports from China. And basically, it's a very clever study where he looks at industries. Basically, Chinese imports became much cheaper after we passed the free trade agreement. It looks at industries that were more and less susceptible to Chinese imports and where they're located. And what he found was
I think I found China. China shock. Right. China shock. This is the one David Autor. Economist David Autor, Dawn Hansen. China trade shock is the impact of rising Chinese exports on manufacturing employment. Oh, okay. Studies agreed that China trade shock reduced U.S. manufacturing employment, although their estimates of the scale of the effect range from 550,000, explaining about 16% of the total decline in manufacturing employment in the U.S. between 2000 and 2007 through 1.8 to 2 million to 2.4 million. Studies have also shown that there was higher unemployment, lower labor force participation, reduced wages in local labor markets. In U.S. regions that have industries that competed with Chinese industries, losses in manufacturing employment have been... 2023 review of existing economic research included that U.S. trade... so I wonder what... I'll save. I've actually got to go. But where are we up to? We'll save these two. And cool. And we're up to do 33. Okay. 33, great. good. That was fun. Catch you next time. We'll finish it off. Do the next one next time. It was sick. Really, 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 really interesting lecture. All right.